Good evening, and welcome to part two, also known as the dry part of our 10th annual March of Remembrance fundraiser and educational program. I'm Sabrina Spector, Associate Director of the JCRC, and I'm thrilled to see so many people here to mark this milestone year with our esteemed guest, Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the ADL. The Raab Goodwin Holocaust and Educational Center is at the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism, bigotry, and all forms of hate in our community, and we are proud of our decades-long partnership with the ADL in this effort. Raab Goodwin's vast array of programming in the schools and within the community help reach thousands of people each year as we teach the painful lessons of the past to prevent them from repeating today. When we requested Mr. Greenblatt to speak at this event, we were delighted by his comment. Of course he would speak for us. They're a Holocaust Education Center and we're all working for the same goal. And tonight, we are all here for the same goal, to become stronger advocates to stand up against hate together. Special events like these come together because of the tireless efforts of dedicated professionals and passionate volunteers. We would like to thank our amazing co-chairs, Randy Stupler and Jen Anelek, and the entire steering committee for their endless energy and vision. Helen Kirschbaum and Aaron Sauer are the dynamic professional duo that deserves our utmost gratitude for all of their work. And of course, our sponsors ensure that we can continue to do our important work all year round. The entire community thanks you for your generosity. Our community is blessed to have numerous survivors living with us. Our love and respect for you drives so much of what we do. Tonight, we welcome Nella Glick, Inga Bass, Charles Middleberg, Ilan Strip, and Fred Kurtz as our honored guests. At this point, I would like to remind everyone to turn off their cell phones or put them on silent as I invite Andrew Gortetsky, ADL Regional Director, to come forward.
Good evening. Thank you to the Southern New Jersey JCRC and the Esther Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I promise to keep it short so that we can get to the main event. I want to thank the Southern New Jersey JCRC for choosing Jonathan's book, It Could Happen Here, for its book club this year. With rising hate and anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, it is more important than ever that we come together in community to fight against this scourge. This book provides us practical information and hope to fight back against the rising tide. Thank you for engaging with it and us this evening. I came to the Anti-Defamation League as the new regional director for the Philly region in January, after serving 23 years in administrative positions in higher education. One of the many reasons I decided to take on this role has been my growing concern of rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on our campuses. I was also very surprised by the number of students I interacted with most recently who did not know much about the Holocaust. I wish the work of the ADL was not needed, but I am grateful to be able to bring my experience in higher education to bear to fight back against this tide of misinformation and disinformation. It is more urgent than ever that we support the work of the ADL and the Esther Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center to ensure that people understand universal lessons from the Holocaust and how to fight back against all forms of hate. My office does serve Southern New Jersey, and Cherry Hill does hold a special place in my heart, as I spent many days and many weekends and time here coming down to visit my aunt and uncle, Elaine and Eugene Dembo. As the new regional director, I hope to hear from you in this community to ensure that we are supporting you. I promise to keep it short, so I will hand it back.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Analik, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this year's JCRC Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center's 10th annual March of Remembrance. It was inspiring to see so many of you at the walk this morning in the rain. Thank you for joining us in person and online to remember and honor the Holocaust survivors in our community, like my grandma, Erna Analik, of blessed memory. It is by showing up like you have today and standing against anti-Semitism, prejudice, and discrimination of all kinds that we can continue to fulfill the promise of never again. Our speaker, Jonathan Greenblatt, whom I have the distinct honor of introducing tonight, has devoted much of his career to preventing anything like the Holocaust from happening again. Mr. Greenblatt is the current CEO of ADL and its 6th national director. Before he joined the ADL in 2015, he served in the White House as special assistant to then President Obama and director of the Office of Social Innovation. Before that, he co-founded the business that launched Ethos Water, a bottled water company with a mission to help children across the world access clean water. At the ADL, Greenblatt has come into contact with everyone from white nationalists to teenagers experiencing anti-Semitism in their schools. He has prioritized responding to anti-Semitism and hatred on the right and on the left. He rebooted the Center on Extremism that analyzes and monitors extremist hate groups. And he launched Never Is Now, the largest annual convening in the world, focused on anti-Semitism and hate, which I watched on YouTube this past year and found it excellent. Greenblatt also created the Center for Technology and Society in Silicon Valley to fight the rising tide of online hate and harassment. In his new and very first book, It Could Happen Here, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It, Greenblatt sounds an alarm, warning that hate and systemic violence are gathering momentum in the United States, and that violence on a more catastrophic scale could be just around the corner. And he shares strategies for how we can strike back and ensure that the United States, where his grandfather found refuge after the Holocaust, is a place that's safe for Jews and for all people. I know I'm looking forward to learning and hearing from him tonight alongside all of you in the audience here and also at home. And please join me in welcoming Jonathan Greenblatt.
Good evening. Come on, guys. There we go. Good. Thank you, Jennifer, for that very nice introduction. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your work as a Jewish educator, which is really, I think, about the highest calling, so thank you. I want to thank everyone from coming out this evening, especially Inga and Charles and Fred and Alana, all the survivors who I had the chance to connect with earlier tonight. All of you give me tremendous inspiration, so thank you. I want to thank David and Helen and Helen and Jennifer from the JCRC. In fact, let's just a moment on Jennifer Weiss. Like, we don't have enough Federation executives who are women. It's an issue across federations all over the country. So kol hakavod to you here in Cherry Hill and in Southern New Jersey. So it is an honor for me to be here on this date at this moment when you're doing this 10th annual March for Remembrance, to pause and reflect on the Shoah and what it means. Because the need to teach the universal lessons of the Holocaust, I might argue, have literally never been more important. We know that many Americans don't know the basic facts about the Holocaust. National surveys tell us that young people today don't know what Auschwitz was. that in the United States and Europe, people doubt the number 6 million. And thanks to a steady stream of Holocaust distortionism, Gesundheit, and Holocaust denialism, and the reality that so many of our survivors are in their twilight, we face a real fact that this most essential event of the 20th century, I would say a pivot point for humanity, has now become subject to the sort of fake news, the conspiracy theories, and this question that we're all living with. It's almost an existential issue today. What is truth? And do the things that we know have happened really happen? But why I think this issue is so important right now, in this moment, is the anti-Semitism that so many of us thought was a relic of an earlier time is surging. It's surging with a vengeance. This isn't my opinion. This is an empirical fact. So the ADL has been tracking anti-Semitic incidents. We've been monitoring hate crimes for longer than law enforcement. And 2021 was the highest count of anti-Semitic incidents we have ever seen. Now, we don't have data for what things were like in the 1930s or even the 1950s, but we started tracking this in the 1970s. And 2021 was a 34% increase over the prior year. That's a big jump. And New Jersey, right here, the Garden State, had the second highest total of any state in America, just behind New York. 370 acts of harassment and vandalism and violence. So the idea that somehow America could be different, would be different, it's been true for a long time. But at a moment when the number of anti-Jewish acts has nearly tripled in less than 6 years, we all have reason to be concerned. Unfortunately, there's no one single cause of this anti-Semitism, and this is something to address just for a moment. Anti-Semitism, you could almost, sometimes it's described as the oldest hatred. I think it should be called the oldest conspiracy theory. It's this sick and twisted idea that the Jews are somehow singularly responsible for fill in the blank. That we have too much power or that we're powerless. That we have too much money or that we're communists. And it comes from all sides. Anti-Semitism isn't simply a problem of the right or simply a problem of the left. Both sides of the political spectrum can express intolerance. What's particularly scary is how we see it amplifying and expanding. And so to address this right-left issue, you know, I have sometimes tried to liken anti-Semitism, tried to draw an analogy to the weather. And tonight seems like a very appropriate time to do that. Anti-Semitism from the extreme right is like Hurricane Ian. We all track that, right? How this Category 4, Category 5 hurricane slammed into Florida, brought torrential rain, terrifying winds, destroyed homes, tore apart buildings, and killed people in an instant. That's what anti-Semitism from the extreme right is like. It hits our communities with terrifying, devastating force. Pittsburgh, Poway, Charlottesville, by the way, Capitol Hill. January 6th, a year, just under 2 years ago, we had people wearing Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts with decals that said 6 WME, 6 million wasn't enough, rampaging through the Capitol. And if you look at the data, right-wing extremists have committed the vast majority of extremist-related murders over the last 10, 20 years, like 75+%. By the way, that's not just in places like Pittsburgh, but also in El Paso. That's not just in places like Poway, but in Buffalo. That's not just in places like Charlottesville, but in Charleston. And I could go on and on. So the right-wing extremism is like a devastating Category 5 hurricane that will kill you in an instant. The anti-Semitism of the extreme left, maybe the best point of comparison is climate change. So it starts down here, no one notices it. And suddenly the temperature gets warmer and some people disregard it, gets warmer and some people deny it, gets warmer and some people say, oh, it's not a big deal, we can adapt to it. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. And suddenly the environment is like this, so inhospitable that you can no longer live there. The climate has been so warped that suddenly the kind of Category 5 storms we saw on the right can now happen on the left. And that's exactly what did happen last May, in May 2021, during the fighting in Gaza, where Jews were attacked in broad daylight all over the country. Their crime wasn't voting for Likud, although that should not be a crime by any stretch. Their crime was wearing a kippah, being visibly identified as Jewish. And none of the perpetrators who were assaulting American Jews in broad daylight, they weren't wearing MAGA hats. They weren't carrying Trump signs. In one instance in Times Square, they were carrying Palestinian flags because they were coming from anti-Israel rallies. So none of us should think that our side of the spectrum is exempt from intolerance. And none of us should also think this is just a matter of politics. Think about what happened in Colleyville, Texas earlier this year, when a crazed man from the UK, radicalized with like Islamic jihadist rhetoric, held Jews hostage in a synagogue because he thought they controlled President Biden. Ooh. Or just up the road in Jersey City a few years ago, December 2019, when 3 people were killed in a kosher supermarket, murdered by Black Hebrew Israelites who thought, we are not the real Jews. We're interlopers, we're imposters. So whether it's Black Hebrew Israelites or radicalized Muslims, religious zealotry of any kind is a problem. Whether it's radical left-wing people or extreme right-wing people, that is a problem. And just to close on this point, we also need to recognize how this is creating pressure on the places where our kids find themselves, like college campuses. I say this as a dad with a son who's now a freshman in college and another one who'll be going away soon. And then another one a couple of years from now. The situation in our college campuses is really pretty alarming. I think the word actually isn't alarming, it's appalling that over decades it's been allowed to calcify in this environment where, as I said in Berkeley last week, Zionists are not allowed. Or just up the road at Rutgers, where the Jewish fraternity was egged on Holocaust Remembrance Day while they were reading the names of victims like those from my family, like from many of your families, like some of your brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. And what starts on the college campus doesn't stay on the college campus. And so this is why we need to focus on remembering the Holocaust and learning its lessons. Well over 90% of all Americans think that their kids should learn about the Holocaust in school, yet only 11 states mandate it. This is why at ADL we are so focused on pushing for Holocaust education. The data tells us that young people who learn about the Holocaust are less likely to have biased attitudes. And so whether it's our existing programs or the work we do in collaboration with JCRC, there's big opportunities and much necessity to making sure that Holocaust and genocide education is introduced for every single student in America. The best way to end hate is to interrupt it before it happens. To do so as proud Jews, to do so as proud Zionists, to do so as proud Americans. I believe this with all the fiber in my being. And it's really why I wrote this book. Andrew sort of referenced it in his very effective remarks to get us kicked off. But this book was intended to take the lessons that we've learned at ADL over decades and to make them, to distill them into a book, to make them accessible to all of you. So whether you're a high school senior preparing to go to college next year, whether a senior citizen talking to your friends, or anyone in between, unfortunately, this is a fight for all of us. Jewish and non-Jewish, old and young, men and women. I know this, from talking to my own kids, they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I just want to go to school. But this is our fight. And older generations had different struggles. This is our struggle today. But I would say to you, and to close, and then we can move David to the Q&A, that this struggle is not just about teaching people about the Holocaust. This struggle is not just about making America safer, if you will, for our kids. This is really about the soul of our country. This is what kind of a country we want to leave to the next generation. As Jan alluded to in her opening, I am the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor from Germany. And my grandfather, who was born and raised in Germany, my great-grandfather fought in the First World War. When he was a young man, he thought America was a wonderful, Germany was a wonderful place to be. And I asked him once, he would never talk about it. He would never show the bravery that so many of our survivors here in this room have done to talk about their experiences. My grandfather wouldn't do that. Couldn't do that. But he said, when I was a young man, I never would have guessed that one day, the only country that I ever knew would reject me, destroy everything that I ever loved, kill everyone that I knew, and force me to come here as a refugee. And he never would have guessed when he was a young man that one day his grandchildren, me, and my brother and my cousins would be born in America. Couldn't have imagined it when he was a young person. 15, 16 years later, I moved to Los Angeles. I'm married now to my wife, and we have our first child. Now, my wife and her family came to the United States. Some of you will know if you read the book. There's going to be a quiz afterwards. She came as an Iranian refugee. They're from Iran. Jews from Iran who trace their heritage, they say, as far back as the Babylonian exile. And they never would have guessed that one day the only country that they ever knew after the rise of Khomeini and Islamic fascism, they never would have guessed that one day they would be declared enemies of the state, that everything that they loved would be destroyed, and that they'd be forced to come here to the United States as refugees. And I remember sitting with my father-in-law and asking him, Mansur Khan, can you believe your grandson is American. My son must have been less than a year, he was crawling on the floor. And he said, no, I never would have guessed. I would have thought when I was a young person, if I had grandchildren, they'd be in Iran, because where else would they be? So my European grandfather couldn't imagine his grandchildren would be anywhere other than Germany. My Iranian father-in-law couldn't imagine that his grandchildren would be anywhere other than Iran. And I can't imagine that my grandchildren would be anywhere other than America. But if I don't want to happen here, what happened in Iran and Germany, I have to, we have to, you have to fight for what we have. We cannot take this for granted, because that's ultimately the lesson. Whether it's in a college, on a college campus like Rutgers, or an office, or a school, or anywhere else, democracy isn't a foregone conclusion. If we want this place to continue to be, and I believe it is, the greatest democracy in the history of the world, we've got to fight for what we have. It's our fight right here, right now. All right, thank you very much, and we'll open it up.
Told me the left, right button all at once, so they were tricking me.
All right.
All right. So good evening, Jonathan, and good evening to all of you, both live and via Zoom. I just want to start by those of you that were able to join us this morning, just give yourselves a hand for coming out and taking part. Awesome. Just waving there. I like that. I also like to recognize the ADL leadership with us. If you can just give a wave along with the JCR leadership.
Hope Comiskey, Andrew Goretsky, everyone, thank you.
So my name's David Snyder. If this is your first JCRC program in 15 years, I am the executive director. And of course, the Esther Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center is a part of our fabulous agency. And tonight, we again are so delighted to have ADL as our partner and have Jonathan Greenblatt here with us to basically talk about the book, talk about Holocaust education, and then we'll see where it goes. Right. So it was a futile effort to make some notes prior to your opening remarks, because I think I had more cross-offs. But what's great is you touched upon so many things we want to talk about.
Great.
So I'm going to have you dig in a little deeper if you don't mind.
Can I say one thing as you pull together?
Of course.
So I just want to underscore what I said at the top, how proud I am to be here, not just as a CEO of ADL, but as a partner with JCRC. I think JCRC and federations, look, I think ADL is the greatest thing in the world, don't get me wrong, but federations are so crucial to our communities. They're the kind of organizing platform, and JCRC plays such a fundamental role. So I am really proud and honored for the deep partnership collaboration we've long had here in Southern New Jersey. So thank you, David. Thank you,
Thank
Jen.
all of you. All right, so let's start with, you mentioned the 2021 audit on anti-Semitism. Yeah. We have a few months left here in 2022. Can you give us a little insight as to where things are trending still? Because 2021 was the highest on record.
That's right.
And where are we?
Well, look, the numbers aren't great. Let's just start with that. So let's just step back. Actually, that's a good opportunity for me to make sure everyone understands what ADL does. So at ADL, our job, if you will, or the reason why we exist is to protect the Jewish people. That's it. That's my job description. That's Andrew's job description. That's Daniel's job description. That's Andrew's job description. Everyone, that's Hope's job description as our local chair, to protect the Jewish people, period. There's a way that we go about doing that. It's kind of like we do three things. We protect, we advocate, and we educate. So number one, we protect. So we track anti-Semitism. We've been tracking these incidents. I'll talk about that in a second. Number two, we monitor the extremists. We used to do that in person. We would infiltrate events. Today, we're doing it online, monitoring the public web and the private web and the dark web. And we work directly with law enforcement. ADL is the largest trainer of law enforcement in the United States on issues of extremism and hate. We trained last year almost 20,000 law enforcement officers. So we train them on what's a hate crime, how's it different than a regular crime, who are the extremists, what are the trends, and then we give them tips as we're monitoring when we think there's a threat. Last year we gave over 1,300 tips to law enforcement, literally neutralizing threats, intercepting attacks before they happened. Now, we're doing this all the time, and I'll talk about advocacy and education in a minute. But to answer your question very directly, David, the data is incredibly alarming. So after almost a 15-year decline from 2001 to 2015, the number spiked in 2016. They went up like 35, 36% year over year. What happened in 2016? Some of us might remember. And then in 2017, the year of Charlottesville, the number jumped 57%. That was the largest single year increase we've ever seen. In 2018, the number dipped 5%. That was the year of Pittsburgh, the most violent anti-Semitic attack in American history. 2019, it jumped back up 12%. That was the highest year on record until 2021, when it went up another 34%. So where does it look like for 2022? So we are getting the data, number one, through all of our regional offices, and we investigate every incident we report. Number two, we get them from partners like JCRCs or Reform synagogues or conservative shoals and so on, Hillels. We have a big partnership with Hillel International. And we also get them directly from law enforcement. And I can tell you, as we think about this year, the numbers unfortunately look very similar to last year. So we're dealing with an environment where it went from here to here, almost 3 times as many. And we are simply at a new normal, an elevated level. And what I really worry about, honestly, is I really worry a great deal about sort of college campuses where we see this sort of mania swirling about and showing up in ways which directly impact young Jewish kids.
So I'm going to have you talk about the work you do in the advocacy area and the education areas, but let's stick with the college campus since you just mentioned that. That is clearly, we know, the hotbed of activity, both from the student perspective, but also the faculty. So can you dig deeper there and talk about what either ADL is doing or what you're seeing and hearing, and really the trends that are seemingly getting worse in terms of uncomfortableness for Jewish students on campus?
So number one, so ADL has had these field offices for decades and decades. I mean, this is our operating model. We don't have chapters on campus. What we do have is a very deep partnership with Hillel International that has 550 outposts. But the situation on campuses has dramatically worsened. So it's not just the egging, but just a step back. It started, I would say, in the early 70s, coming off of 67, as suddenly people like Angela Davis and other activists accused the Jews in Israel of occupying Palestine. And that started to become table stakes for the far left. People like Noam Chomsky and others picked up this rhetoric. And as what happened is it then started infiltrated, if you will, the academy, the professors. People like Edward Said at Columbia University was a big advocate of this. And it started to become a kind of status quo among faculty that to be progressive meant to be anti-Israel. What's happened in recent years, and then those faculty became advisors to student groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, a group which is explicitly and intentionally and serially anti-Semitic, because they take a position of anti-Zionism, but as I've said many times, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. This is not a debate. This is not about nuance. When it literally, like at Berkeley last week, they said, no Zionists allowed. Several student groups said that. They say Zionists. What they mean are Jews, right? We had a situation, here's a great story, if you will, in Boston earlier this summer. Great is the wrong word. I mean, like, here's a clarifying story. A group called the Mapping Project. Did you hear about that?
Of course, Boston.
For those of you who aren't familiar with, a group of anonymous activists posted a map of organizations they blamed for, get this right, Zionism, empire, and oppression. So what were the groups that were responsible for oppression? Who did they list? Well, of course, they listed the
Were we in
ADL.
good company?
Yeah,
I
the
think we were.
Federation and ADL, CJP and ADL. But then off of that, they listed groups like the Home for the Elderly, the JCC, like a Center for Disabled Adults, an arts nonprofit. What did all these groups have in common? The middle school, the Jewish middle school. What all these groups had in common, they're Jewish. Now, the idea that an arts nonprofit, in like Newton, Massachusetts, is responsible for oppression is about as absurd as it sounds. But we've shifted into this world in which being a Zionist, people use that as a kind of slur. And that's a euphemism for Jew. And so what's so worrisome about this and why we're working so hard with Hillel to educate the administrations at these schools, to push back on these professors, to support the students, is it is inexcusable and intolerable that in America, our kids can't show up as Jewishly as they want to be. Applying litmus tests only to Jews is the height of discrimination, and it's exhibit A in terms of anti-Semitism. And I'll conclude by just sharing, can you imagine for a moment if someone said, we're not going to allow any Chinese American students to run for office unless they tell us first what's their position on Beijing's treatment of the Uyghurs? That would be bananas to hold them responsible. Could you imagine for a moment if student clubs right now said, no Russian American students can participate in organizations unless they tell us their opinion on the Ukraine? That would be a litmus test that would be wrong. And telling Jewish students, you can't participate unless you tell us your position on Zionism is disgusting, and it's contemptible, and it's wrong.
Thank you. So let's turn to your book for a moment. The title again is It Could Happen Here, Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. I first want to mention that we are proud that it was the selection, unanimous selection from our Esther Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center Steering Committee to be the choice for our second community-wide book club. We have about 500 that have already been distributed. We think about 20, we've either had or will be holding 20 different groups,
Bravo.
conversations.
Hell,
We'll have to have as a guest speaker to pop on maybe one night to say hello to the group. But going well with lots of the area synagogues and other community groups.
Where's Carol? Didn't Carol make that happen? Where's Carol?
Yeah, where's Carol?
She's somewhere in the audience. I
There
don't
she
know where
is.
she is. There she
All
is.
right. So let's just start with the title. And you kind of alluded to it again in your opening remarks.
Yes.
You take this pretty seriously, and you do have some concerns that when I asked how the trends are going, we were already at a high in 21. Is this cyclical, or what is the ultimate extreme, I guess, manifestation of if we allow the hatred, bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism to continue to, foster itself?
Look, there's a lot of different ways this could go, but I'll share some potential scenarios, which I think when I was in college a few years ago would have seemed impossible to imagine. But imagine a world in which kids or high school seniors applying to college are asked on their application whether or not they're Zionist. Imagine a world in which in the workplace, it's okay to discriminate against, again, Zionists, and you're asked that in a job interview, to work at McDonald's because the manager doesn't want to hire any Zionists who are responsible for oppression. Imagine a world in which the Proud Boys, an awful anti-Semitic organization, get license from, let's say, a new Republican governor in Pennsylvania who's shown affiliations and alike for Gab and the Proud Boys. They're allowed to run militias across the Keystone State, just over the water. And they stand in front of synagogues on a Saturday morning, patrolling. Or they make stops at homes where they see they have sukkahs in the back. They just want to patrol and see what's going on. They're armed, by the way. Think about that. Think about a world in which, again, school people stop running for school boards because they're afraid. Think about a world in which the Diary of Anne Frank is removed from libraries across the United States. I mean, I could go on, but all these things are absolutely, they would have once seemed inconceivable. None of that seems inconceivable to me today.
Thank you. So you kind of dipped the toe there, but let's go a little deeper. You referenced both again just now and in the remarks. We are a deeply divided country. Political leanings are quite broad. I'm being nice here. The implications of the deep political divide in our country and its effect on the problem of anti-Semitism. Where are you most concerned? Where do you see it going? Are we heading in the right direction, wrong direction?
So I think if we try to understand what are the causal factors, what's driving the rise of anti-Semitism, we could talk about social media at some point, which is an amplifier. It both facilitates and it kind of fosters it. We can talk about, again, the twilight of the generation of survivors, which I think is something, our collective memory is fading. But I would actually say the polarized nature of this country is contributing more than anything. I think anti-Semitism has both been normalized by both sides and weaponized. So what do I mean? When I say normalized, look, just so we say, I'll say this right now. You know my background, Jen, shared it. I don't really care how you vote. I could care less. What I care about is what you value. That's what I'm interested in as the head of the ADL. I'm not a political organization, but I don't think there's anything political in calling out prejudice. My opinion. But let me tell you, when you have people, pundits and public figures on the far right, who demonize George Soros every day and accuse him of paying migrants to come across the border, not true. When they espouse this great replacement theory, which is basically literally cut and pasted from the protocols of the elders of Zion, that there's a cabal of people and us, planning horrible things, white genocide and whatnot. When you have people on the right who say this stuff, who show up at school board meetings with Jewish stars on their shirt as if they were somehow persecuted because they're forced to wear, take COVID-19 precautions. Give me a break. But that kind of ugly distortionism contributes to, again, a normalization of anti-Semitism from the right. All the things I was saying before, we also see coming from the left. Wild and unfounded and hateful allegations that the Jewish state is committing genocide. It is not. That Zionists somehow are training US law enforcement in the West Bank to brutalize Black people in this country. They are not. And that Israel is responsible for every conceivable sin. It is not. But whether you're normalizing prejudice against the Jewish people or the Jewish state, we get caught in between. So I think that normalization and the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and again, by the way, this race in Pennsylvania, David, really exemplifies it. Again, I don't care if you like Mastriano or Shapiro, but Josh Shapiro is a good, decent guy. He's an observant Jew. I don't know if he lays tefillin every day, but he's certainly proud of his Jewish identity, and I respect him for that. And the guy on the other side, vote for him if you like. I'm not telling you how to vote, but giving money to Gab, a noxious anti-Semitic social media platform, whose founder, whose name I'm not going to dignify him by mentioning his name here, but who signs his emails, Christ is King, and says all kinds of crazy anti-Semitic conspiracies. It's mind-boggling. And the way that candidate went after he went after parents who send their kids to private schools, fancy private schools, meaning Jewish day schools. Now, I don't know how many of you send your kids to Schechter or wherever. I wouldn't call them fancy private schools. So but saying this, and there's no criticism from like national leaders in the GOP. Just like, you know, if Rashida Tlaib spent 1/10 of her time focusing on her district versus on quote unquote, you know, the crimes of Israeli apartheid. But there's very little criticism of her by the leadership of the Democratic Party. So this is what I mean when I say it's been normalized and weaponized. And I think, David, the last thing I'll say, I think our polarization seems poised to get worse before it gets better. But the way that we turn this around, the way that we avert an emergency is when people on the right call out anti-Semitism and extremism on the right. And when people on the left call out anti-Semitism, extremism on the left, it's not enough to point fingers across the way. We have to have some degree of accountability to ourselves. By the way, last thing, this is why I'm so encouraged by, really happy to see my friend Ted Deutsch, who's the new CEO of the American Jewish Committee. He's a really good guy. He was a great legislator. And I think he's got the courage and the credibility as a former Democratic member of Congress who worked with these people to call things as he sees things. We need more of that on the left and indeed on both sides.
Thank you. Helen, what does this mean? Stop talking? I know what that is. So I think I've gone over my time here.
That's
although
a
I have plenty more I wanna
sophisticated
hit.
system.
Yeah, well, we have our own little sign
Zip it.
language. So this is
Wrap it up.
the opportunity for you to ask some questions. We do have 2 microphones in the middle of the room here this evening. If you have something you'd like to ask Jonathan, please come forward. It's my favorite time to always use my one joke that is, you know, questions end with a question mark. So please just try to, you know,
And
ask
if
a
you will,
question.
I met a lot of you earlier, but please tell me your name before you ask your question so I know who you are.
My name is Jennifer Apel. I want to know something positive that we can do.
Oh, that's awesome, Jennifer. So Jennifer asked, so what's something positive we can do to push back, I think, on the anti-Semitism, right? Well, I'll share with you a quick way of thinking about it that everyone can do. And some of this is in the book. So number one, speak out. When you see hate happen, say something. And again, if you identify of a certain persuasion, so you think you're from the right, call it out when you hear from conservatives. If you're from the left, call it out when you see it among progressives. Interrupting intolerance starts with all of us being accountable, whether it's in the locker room, on the playing field, at the workplace, on the Zoom meeting. That biased attitude, that ugly comment, stop and say something. Even if it's at the Shabbat dinner table. Now you got to calibrate effectively. You know, you got to modulate relative to a particular situation. But number one, speak up. That's something we can all do, Jennifer. By the way, on Facebook, flag the comment on Twitter, or flag the comment on Facebook, report the comment on Twitter. That's number one. Number two, share facts. I think we have to share facts. What I mean is we've all got to dial down the drama. Please don't forward that crazy email from your mother's cousin's neighbor's friend at work who says that Barack Obama's from Kenya and really a Muslim. He's not. Neither of those things are true. That says that, you know, Ilhan Omar wants to impose Sharia law in the United States. She doesn't. Right? I mean, I think we all need to focus on facts, not more hysteria. And I also think when we talk about sharing facts, I think it's really important to recognize that, like, I'll tell you right now, you know, Jennifer, I don't believe in cancel culture. I believe in counsel culture. When someone makes a mistake, we should bring them in, not push them away. Like when someone on Wednesday, we're going to say the Al-Chet prayer in Shul, right? There's Raab. I met Micah, Rabbi Micah. He's somewhere in those areas in the back. Ask him, not me. I'm not so observant. But this is the period of time, right, in these days of awe, when we need to go to those people who we may have offended and ask for forgiveness. And I think forgiveness is an incredibly important Jewish value. So again, part of sharing facts means to embrace other people, not excommunicate them. And then finally, you got to show strength. Showing strength means leaning in. Like democracy, as I was alluding to in my remarks, it's not a spectator sport. Don't assume that tomorrow's going to be just like yesterday. Don't assume that this democracy is going to hold together unless we fight for it. So leaning in means, I don't know, having a husband who's the president of JCRC. So your family is leaning in. Leaning in means showing up and walking for that March of Remembrance, as many of you did today. Leaning in means volunteering with the JCRC or ADL. Leaning in means getting involved, means running for office. There's lots of different ways we can do it. And leaning in also means not just for yourself, but for others. You know, I think about Hillel, right? If I am not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? Leaning in means being an ally. So showing strength means showing up for other people, not because it's a quid pro quo. I do for them, therefore you would do for me. You do for others because it's the right thing to do. And that's enough.
Sounds to me like Jonathan took our pledge to stand up for the other. So if you haven't signed that or taken that pledge here in this community, we will get it out to all of you. So thank you for that. Howard?
I'm Howard Siegel. I apologize if you've answered this because I haven't read your book yet in the book. I don't think it could have happened without the government getting involved. And I think even if our government seems to be leaning against us, do you think the Supreme Court is still powerful enough to protect us in the Constitution?
So Howard asked a really hard question. Is the Supreme Court powerful enough? Well, look, here's what I think, Howard, and for everyone. I mean, the Supreme Court is one of the three branches, right? And it's intended to be a bit of a check or a balance in how you look at it on the others. But I think we should all be concerned about a kind of capture in any of the branches of government, you know? There is no one branch or one body that will save us. Now that sounds a little bit glib, but ultimately I think only we can save ourselves. What do I mean? What I mean is this is why voting matters, why volunteering matters. I don't think we can rely on the Supreme Court to save us. And I think one of the lessons of the Trump administration, again, you gotta love him or hate him. Not my business. But I think what he did do was take a battering ram to our institutions. The intelligence community, Congress, the free press, civil servants, law enforcement, the judiciary. I could go on and on. And I think ultimately those institutions held up, but only under great duress. And I think really what we learned from that experience is that these institutions, you know, they look like the Supreme Court building in Washington with the steps and the pillars. It looks so intimidating, but really it's just a building. It's held together by these invisible values. So I think we have to hope for, Howard, for all of us, is that our values are strong enough, and they're only strong if we imbue them with strength. So yeah, we got to vote. Yeah, we got to show up. And last thing I'll say is, however you want to vote, like I'm not telling you to pull this lever or that lever, but what I am telling you is that, you know, to paraphrase Ben Franklin, we can keep, what happened? What happened to these folks? We running out of time?
You want to do a speed round with the
Come back up and we'll do a speed round.
It's a good idea.
Come back up. There's two of you. We'll do it fast. All right. So I'm gonna stop talking now, Howard. But again, I think it's a work in progress. All right.
See your skills here. We'll have all three
what I
of
can
each
do.
your questions and we'll
Tell
have
me your
Jonathan
names
kinda-
too. Oh, that we met earlier,
Yeah,
but not everybody met you. So
yeah, Nate Warshawski, great to meet you all. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And I have a question, and I'm sorry if it's in the book. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but now
That's
I really
okay.
want to.
Good.
But I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on solidarity and the role of solidarity, and how making sure that the fight against anti-Semitism doesn't lead to Islamophobia, and that the fight against anti-Semitism does in effect strive to achieve the core American and Jewish values around justice for all and tikkun olam.
bravo. Thank you. That's Charles's grandson, by the way, if you haven't met him.
My question's a little bit longer. I don't know if you want to tackle his first.
Go fast.
Okay, all right.
What's your name?
My name is Bonnie Galam. Thank you so much. for-
Bonnie?
Yes. And so my question is, I guess, first to the audience, how many people here are not Jewish? Okay. So how do we get non-Jews to show up in solidarity alongside us? Because it's less than 3% of the population. We need rooms that look a lot different like this to show up alongside of us. And so I'll cut out the rest of my
I'll be
question.
curious
That's-
with
that's the
Jonathan's
short-
answers to that, but please see myself or Helen or anybody else locally here, and we can talk about that.
I'll take that,
Sounds
Bonnie.
good.
I'll take that on.
Well, you talked about using.
What's your
facts.
name, ma'am?
Esther.
Esther.
You talked about using facts, but people who are bigoted tend not to look at facts. But I want to say, I still can't understand how the Palestinians are so powerful. They've totally obliterated, when Israel declared itself, 850 Jews were misplaced from all the Arab countries. They're just thrown out. There's absolutely no talk about it. How could they be so powerful to have like so many people on their side? And the Americans who support the Palestinians, you're right, it's anti-Semitism, because if they really cared about the oppressed, why aren't they speaking up for Native Americans? Look what this country did to them.
I think
It's-
Jonathan, I'm confident
Sure.
that he knows the question.
Okay, I got it, Esther. Thank you. So let's do these in reverse. So to the last question, like, look, I actually believe that we need a two-state solution to the Arab-Israeli crisis, to the Israeli-Palestinian dilemma. I think you need to create two entities, one that will make sure that Palestinians can live with dignity and a degree of equality, even while Jews can live with safety and a degree of security. I don't think these things are oppositional. I think they need to be complementary. Until such time as there's a Palestinian state willing to embrace these principles, I don't see it happening, but that's the goal we need to strive for. Because you're right, like I know 850,000 Jews were displaced from Muslim countries and mostly not entirely Arab world, much like my wife's family in Iran. And who's there for them? So there is a real issue here. I think ultimately a two-state solution is what we need. Now, to Bonnie's question, where's Bonnie? She's over there. Like, we can't do this without allies. I appreciate you pointing out that you said we're less than 3%. Jews are maybe 2% of the US population. That's if we're counting really generously. Like, oftentimes we were talking about this earlier, David. I have people say to me, why does ADL do so much for non-Jews? Like, guys, if we can't enlist the rest of the country in our fight, we lose. Like, we all can do basic arithmetic here. Like, there's arguably 7 million of us in a country of 350 million people. So we absolutely, Bonnie, need to do a better job of that. We need to continue to make this our cause. And I think, Judaism has given the world so much, and the Jewish people have given the world so much, disproportionate to our numbers, if you will. We focus at the ADL on protecting Jewish people by fighting all forms of hate. So when I stand up against anti-Black racism, when I stand up against anti-Asian hate, when I stand up against Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bias, I do this because our tradition impels us to. I do this because it's the morally right thing to do. And I do this because we need allies too. And it's, again, not a quid pro quo. We do it because it's the right thing to do. But I think all of us need to do a better job of pulling in non-Jewish allies. And by the way, I'll say something else that might not be so popular, but we are a multi-ethnic, multiracial Jewish community itself. My wife doesn't look like a lot of people, everybody in this room. And I think we need to recognize the diversity within our own community too, and bring in those Jews of color who for far too long have been marginalized or at least not welcome. And then the last thing I'll say is we will never have safety in this country or in any country unless we also have solidarity. And that's where the question started, and it's just so true. The reality is that we have to lock arms with our brothers and sisters from the Black community, from the AAPI community, from the Latino community, not only because, again, many of us come from there and vice versa. We just have more in common than the things that keep us apart. So one of the challenges is we fight hate to really also kindle hope. And you do that not just by doing this, but by blocking things. You do this by opening your arms and welcoming. This is particularly true as it relates to this issue of anti-Muslim bias, which you asked about. Because, look, the reality is there is a long-standing dilemma in the Middle East which is 70 plus years now. And while I would say that it's not of our own making, that doesn't mean we can't make an effort to welcome and embrace our Muslim brothers and sisters. That doesn't mean we have to renounce our Zionism. I am a proud, unabashed, unapologetic Zionist. You better believe it. But that doesn't mean that I can't find ways to connect with other people in this country. Might not share all of my ideas, but if I can bring them in, ultimately they and we and all of us, I think, will be much better off.
Mike, if you don't start walking up here, Helen's going to carry you up. So thank you, Jonathan. Mike Bass.
Special thanks to Jonathan Greenblatt for joining us this evening and for sounding the alarm of potentially what our world may look like in the immediate future if hate, discrimination, and anti-Semitism, as well as the violence associated with them, are not kept in check. Everyone here this evening surely knows the importance of combating such divisive words and activities, so we must continue to educate ourselves and others using important lessons learned from the Holocaust. As politician Thomas Dewey said so well at the onset of World War II, an attack on a minority group in any country is an attack on democracy itself. To our many sponsors and donors, we are deeply grateful for your generosity. Your donations support our mission to teach people about the past and to educate for the future through the painful lessons of the Holocaust. Our objective is to reduce prejudice and lessen hatred, bigotry, bullying, and violence against all groups. We cannot continue to do all that we do without your support. For those who haven't had a chance to support our work, it's never too late. You can use the tear-out sheet at the back of tonight's program, and we will also make sure you receive a follow-up link where you can visit our website at any time. Again, thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and good night.